Schools are closed, and everyone is talking about the virus. Children pick up on stress and may respond in different ways than adults. Love, attention, and routine can make them feel more secure. For more tips from Seattle children's experts to support your family as you cope, live, and learn during COVID, follow Seattle Children's on Facebook or visit seattlechildrens.org. Schools are closed.
Hi, my name is Elaine Sulkin, and I'm the publisher and CEO of ParentMap. First, I want to welcome you today and thank you for Zooming in. And I also want to take a moment with you. It seems in the last many months, we've used the word unprecedented in talking about COVID-19 and the time we're in. And I think once again, we have elevated the word unprecedented given the last couple weeks since the murder of George Floyd. And I urge you to look at ParentMap's. We have an anti-racist new resource page on our website. We are counting on you, our readers and attendees to events, to let us know what's happening in your neighborhood. So we're asking you if you're aware of any peaceful protests or talks going on, please let us know, and we would be happy to share that information with our audience and work together to take action to have in the future for our families an anti-racist USA. So thank you in advance. I want to thank you again for joining us to this webinar, Old School Summer, Bringing Back Free Play, featuring Screentime Consultant Emily Cherkin. Emily is born and raised in the Pacific Northwest and has 2 children and has worked with families in schools for the last 15 years. She's now known as the Screentime Consultant. She's a former middle school teacher and has created many workshops that take a tech intentional approach. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Good Morning America, and in many local media news outlets like ParentMap. For those of you that are not familiar with ParentMap, we are a content-rich website, book publishers, proud of our June issue that is out on the streets right now, especially in grocery stores where parents are going. And we hope that you'll check out parentmap.com if you've not, and you can sign up for home delivery as well. Before we begin with Emily, I just want to cover a few housekeeping topics. So today's webinar is being recorded. We will use it both promotionally, educationally, and anyone who registered will get a link and copy of it. We also invite your questions and answers. And we've had wonderful dynamic speakers with ParentMap Live, but I will tell you, you and your participation in questions is kind of the great enhancement. It's kind of the cyber porch of friends talking to each other and asking each other questions. So at the bottom of your screen where you see the Q&A, please send us questions. Of course, we couldn't do this without you signing in and joining Emily Cherkin. And thank you for supporting our virtual events. You can always, on our event page, when you sign in, you can make we are not a 501c3, but you can support good journalism, paid journalism, well-researched and written journalism, which I think is ParentMap's trademark. So with that, I just also want to thank our sponsors, our presenting sponsors, Alto Pharmacy and Seattle Children's, as well as additional sponsors, Child and Teen Solutions, Sleeping Lady Mountain Resort. And at this time, I would like to hand it over to Emily Cherkin. Hi, Emily.
Hello. Hi, Elaine. Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Let's see here. Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon. So as Elaine said, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for ParentMap, to ParentMap for having me here. I'm really honored to be here. And as Elaine said, I've been thinking a lot about what's happening in the world, not just in the last 6 months, but the last few weeks. And I just want to name that for some families, it's really a privilege to be able to think about having a summer that looks different than the summer we had planned. And I just want to make sure that that point is clear, that I do hope that all of us will get an opportunity to sort of slow down, listen and take in other people's experiences, both within our own families and outside of our families. And really more than ever, our kids need us. So it's an opportunity this summer for us to get to be with our children in a new way. So I'm Emily Cherkin, like Elaine said, and I have 2 children myself. They're 9 and 12. And I did spend 15 years working with middle school students. I always like to say up front too that my husband works at a startup in the tech industry, so we have lots of interesting discussions about screens in our house. And as Elaine pointed out, I am not anti-technology, I am tech intentional. So I will touch on my philosophy in a second here. One of the things I always like to say too is, in spite of having taught middle school for 15 years, parenting is by far the hardest job I've ever had. And so I have a lot of empathy for families right now, especially as screen time has changed dramatically because of online learning and remote school, being quarantined. And of course, normal isn't what it was 3 months ago or 6 months ago. So I know that a lot of us as parents are going into summer overwhelmed, stressed out, maybe panicking. We feel burned out, we're frustrated, our kids are Zoom fatigued. So I know summer's going to look really different. And my hope today is to give you a little bit of some ideas that can help your family sort of prepare for an old school summer and set you up for success. So very briefly, my philosophy when it comes to this work, and yes, I focus primarily on screen time, but there's a lot of related issues to families and parenting that go with that. So as I said, I'm not anti-technology, I'm tech intentional. I really believe there's a time and a place and how we use technology. I really believe in, I'll show you my next slide. Oh, there's my children. I guess I forgot to do that slide. Here's my philosophy. I also believe in replacing judgment with curiosity, which really just means before we get defensive or angry or frustrated with our kids for whatever reason, it could be screen time related or not, that we just sort of take a pause and get curious first. Because if we can ask questions, the getting curious part, and get some information from our kids, it makes it a lot easier to have a conversation than if we jump right in a combative way. And of course, now more than ever, we really need to be thinking about what it means to be flexible and having compassion for ourselves and for others. And we can teach these things and talk to our children about them too. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then of course, too, finally, more than ever before, I mean, it's always been true, but adults matter and our kids are under a lot of stress, as are we. And so we need to be able to talk to them about that. So, okay, old school summer. What do I mean by old school summer? I mean, I think it's funny, I've seen a lot of articles and other stories going out about this, like how to rethink summer. And really, I think what I've noticed is we've been caught up in the last few years of just, almost like burnout with scheduling and birthday parties and events and camps and after school programs. I mean, in Seattle, you have to sign up for summer camps like in January or February, and many fill up that quickly. And so suddenly all of those things are not happening, and our trips are not happening, and our social time and interactions with other kids have changed. So we've got a lot to think about in a different way. And if you're a parent who's trying to work from home on top of all this, this might be particularly daunting. So we kind of have two options. We can do kids inside on screens all day and have lots of arguments and everybody's miserable, or we can try something different, which is why I'm really advocating for this idea of an old school summer. So, back when we were kids, yeah, maybe we went to camp, maybe we did some travel, but a lot of our time was spent outside with friends and neighbors. And the TV that we watched, you couldn't watch shows 24/7. You had to kind of wait till your show was on. It was a very different experience. And for our children who are used to really structured schedules, and especially in the summer, it's going to require a real shift in our mindset, but I believe it will be worth it. So I want to give you a little bit of context around why we need an old school summer. And then I'm going to give you 6 ingredients for how to do an old school summer. So the first thing I want to share with you is this slide that was made by a colleague of mine, Dr. Doug Gentile at the Iowa State Media Research Center. And he put this together, and I have just can't stop thinking about it. So he has looked at how childhood has changed over the last 50 years. And what I love about his work is that he really talks about this idea of displacement, that when we spend time on screens, it is displacing other things that we might be doing. And while that seems obvious, he actually went ahead and did the data. He mapped it out. So I want to show you what that looks like. So this is a week in the life of an average American school-age child. And interestingly, this is almost already 10 years out of date in terms of the numbers, but you'll see the trends are still pretty fascinating. So in a total week, we have 168 hours. And for children, generally it's about 49 hours of that is spent sleeping. It's too little personal care, eating, washing, dressing, 21 hours. School, in theory, 30 hours a week, although today that looks different. Leaving in 1950, 68 open hours for everything else, all the extracurriculars, all the play, all the family time, homework, chores, all of that. As you can probably anticipate, that green slope goes down. So as time passes, things start to displace the other category or the open category. So early 80s television, I put television in quotes because of course TV doesn't mean the same thing today as it did when we were children. But you can see that open out 68 hours now has shrunk dramatically, in part because of television. And of course, adding in the early 2000s, or even earlier really, video games and computer time, which leaves our children with a whopping 14 hours a week of open time. So if we compare, I mean, certainly that would be our parents' childhood, our childhood, and our children's childhood. That's a pretty dramatic shift. So why does this matter? Because our number one job as parents is to keep our kids safe. And this was true before the pandemic and quarantine and global chaos and protests and marches. And for this upcoming summer, this is still true. Our hope is that in 5 to 10 years, kids will look back on this summer of 2020 and maybe remember it for more than just what was happening on the news. Maybe there will be some new memories formed for them. So really the beginning point here is to start with the end in mind. In September, what do you want your kids to remember about how they spend time this summer? And I want you to think for a moment about your own favorite summer childhood memories. What stands out? What was unstructured versus structured activities? What activities did you participate in if they were structured? Was there camps or classes or jobs? Did you have chores? Did you help out the neighbors? And then what did you do in your unstructured time? Playing outside, travel, exploring the neighborhood, roaming parks? And which of these memories do you remember most fondly and why? So with that in mind, there are two things I really believe parents need to know and understand in order to set ourselves up for a really successful old school summer. So the first thing is something called executive function skills, or EF skills. And really what this is in the front part of our brain is the prefrontal cortex. And that's where all of these skills are happening and growing and developing. And developmentally speaking, kids' brains don't fully develop until they're well into their 20s. And so this is a lifelong, or at least early life, ongoing process. Kids don't just learn them in childhood. They're constantly building and growing. And they include skills like organizing, planning, prioritizing, time management, emotion regulation, essentially all the skills that really matter for sort of a successful life as an adult. But it isn't something that kids instinctively just know how to do, right? They have to practice it and be experiences that help them grow those skills. And it's important because children are not small adults. As any parent knows, you can't just ask a child to do something in the same way you ask an adult and expect the same result. So typically, many of these skills do get taught in a classroom. And I know that as a former middle school teacher, one of the most important things I felt I could teach my 7th graders was how to use a planner and plan long-term assignments and take accountability for their missing and late work. And yes, the content was great and I enjoyed doing that, but it was really just a vehicle for teaching these executive functioning skills. And in many ways, I think that's true across education in multiple grades. So of course, though, we know that school has changed so dramatically because of the global pandemic and kids haven't been in classrooms. But the good news is it's actually pretty easy to give kids opportunities to practice building these skills. We just need to know that that's what we're doing and have lots of patience as our kids try to struggle and fail and eventually try again and eventually succeed. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's not about getting something right the first time. The learning happens in the struggle. So doing the hard things is actually really valuable from a brain development perspective. So we have a lot of opportunities this upcoming summer to give our kids chances to practice these EF skills. And I would argue that they're more valuable than doing some academic workbooks or online academics over the summer in the name of trying to catch up. So we'll talk about that more in a second. The second thing I really, really want parents to know and understand is this concept of persuasive design, which is really just the practice of combining psychology and technology to change our behavior. And when it comes to screen use, this is really, really important because our kids may be spending more time on screens right now than we even want them to. But what happens is, you can think about your own smartphones, for example. The psychological term for this is intermittent variable rewards, which really just is like a slot machine. You pull the slot and sometimes you win, but you don't win all the time and you don't win predictably. And our phones function a lot like that. Sometimes we get new alerts, sometimes we get new messages, but not at a regular interval. So our brains feel like we need to keep going back and checking that because we want to see if that new message is there. So we get it often enough that we feel like we kind of have to keep going and refreshing and refreshing. This is also true of games, especially games designed for children, which have built-in rewards or points or tokens or coins. They operate the same way. They hijack a child's brain and feel-good hormones start flooding into those neural pathways to make them want to keep playing and do it more. And I know that any parent here would agree that they've had a moment where they asked for a phone or a tablet or a game back and the child had a meltdown, because the reality is it's their brain has been really hooked by persuasive design and the way in which these products and games are developed. So because this is true, we really need to help educate our children about this, that it isn't that they're a bad child or that they have no willpower or that somehow there's a defect with them, that part of this is a parenting problem, but also B, you're fighting against an industry where child psychologists are hired to help design these products to be more addictive for children. And so there's a reason that kids can't manage their own screen use. It's their underdeveloped executive function skills in combination with these persuasive design techniques that make these screen time battles particularly challenging. So we get to teach them about this, and it is really a valuable thing. And I love talking about this with kids because they get really outraged when they find out they've been tricked or manipulated. So we can harness that for good and make them realize it's not about their lack of ability to control their screens, it's the way it's been designed. So I want to leave you with 6 ingredients for an old school summer, because this is really the important stuff here. So first of all, boredom is good. And I am sure that every parent in the entire world has heard their child utter the words, "I'm bored." And I know that when we were kids, we probably said that to our parents too. And sometimes it drives me nuts because we have a house full of toys. How could you possibly be bored? But modern parents might know that when I hear a kid say I'm bored, what we're actually hearing is either I want screen time or I don't remember what else to do when I don't have screen time. And because our modern lives are so structured and built around school and lessons and after school activities and play dates, kids are not actually having a lot of opportunities to practice boredom. So they're kind of out of practice. And we as parents can help them see that boredom isn't bad and it doesn't have to mean I want screens. So right now, I mean, many of us may have experienced a lot of boredom with this monotony of quarantine, but we really need to think about what it means when kids say that. So it's maybe they need a change of scenery. Maybe they need some creative tips to get going. Maybe they need a task to occupy them. I'm not saying you can't give them suggestions when they're bored, but I also want to invite you to be okay with them being bored, because some of the greatest ideas of our times have come, while people are stuck in traffic or, in the shower or lying in the grass looking at the clouds. And boredom leads to creativity, and creative people are easily able to adapt to big changes. And we're going through nothing but big changes in our world right now. So the more opportunities you can actually provide for boredom in the summer is actually a positive, and to talk about it positively. My kids hate it when I say boredom's an opportunity and then they roll their eyes and I say, or I have a bathroom to clean. They don't like that. So this is our first ingredient. Second ingredient is that play is learning. Play is the work of childhood, and we have decades of research on child development, and especially for younger children, play is the best way for them to learn new concepts. It's what makes this remote learning so challenging for early childhood, because they need that hands-on experience in the context of relationships. And so while school might serve a purpose beyond just content, socialization is a good reason, play as learning can happen anywhere, anytime, and it's even better when it's kid-directed. So we have to trust that when our kids are playing, they are learning. And after all, that's what the best preschools and school programs do, is when they take a concept and make that experience of learning it meaningful and engaging. So play is most instructive when it is 3-dimensional, hands-on, autonomous, and in the company of others, although independent play has benefits too. So any activities that meet these requirements ensure that learning is happening, whether that's a STEM kit that you've mail ordered or playing in a mud hole in the backyard. I've had a lot of parents in the past ask me, well, like my daughter likes this app on the iPad and it's like a block building app and it's really cool to see what she's making. And I will tell you that is not the same thing. So when you are building with 3-dimensional blocks that you can feel and hold, there are so many different skills happening: spatial awareness, math, physics, engineering, art, design. When you're tapping on a 2-dimensional screen, your brain is not building and growing those same synaptic connections. So building and playing in messy, hands-on way is learning, and it is building new connections in the brain. So for a lot of us who might be type A parents, we might see the mess and the wandering mind and panic. I should be doing more. This isn't math. He needs to be doing this. But I'm here to tell you that it is more important than ever for parents to emphasize, encourage, and allow play. And a note about what else play can do is provide our children an opportunity to work through emotional challenges or fears. And so a lot of play-based therapy for children is built on that idea. So we want to allow it because it gives kids opportunities to practice some of that. So we also then have to accept the mess for those of us who might be uncomfortable with a messy house. This whole hands-on bit means that mess is inevitable, but it is in this physical and tactile hands-on activities that kids are growing their brains, and it is so important. When my kids were young, I had a colleague tell me that I could have either quiet, messy children or loud, neat children. And at the time I didn't get it, but now I totally do. I had to let go of that need for a clean, tidy house if I wanted my kids to be occupied and experiencing their worlds. And if I focused on keeping the house clean all the time, the kids were stressed out and they get toys out and then I would be stressed out. So we have to let go of having the house look maybe the way we want or the backyard or whatever. And of course, it doesn't mean we exempt kids from cleaning up or chores or responsibility. Those are great executive function skill opportunities as well. So, but it does mean we can let go of sort of our own need for perfection. So if you can, this summer, because especially in Seattle, we've got great weather, you know, in the summer, except for January, but you can invite the mess outside. And I know people are using their backyards in a whole new way, you know, if they have the opportunity to have a backyard, but, you know, fresh air, being dirty are all really great things for kids. I used to say that, you know, my bare feet in the summer, depending on how tough they were by the end of the summer, was a sign of how good my summer had been. And one of my favorite childhood memories was literally digging a big mud hole in the yard and filling it with water to drive trucks in and out of. So yes, it's going to be very messy and muddy and the yard won't look great, but then you just put some water in a bucket by the door before kids come in, and then you get to talk about cleaning up, and that's a valuable skill as well too. So another word about learning, and again, if play is learning, what about all that school that our kids just missed? Is there something we should be doing to try to catch up? Well, right now, learning does not mean academic catch-up. Not catch-up, but catching up. So before I address this, I really want you to think as a parent for a moment about how this remote learning experience has gone for you so far and how you would feel if I were to say for the next 3 months, you've got to continue this remote learning and even though the weather is better and the days are longer and you're still trying to work. I don't think many parents are going to jump for that because it's been exhausting and hard and overwhelming and we're all burned out. So I imagine that many of us are concerned, though, about the content that was missed. And, you know, there are very real concerns in the gaps in learning for some children in particular. And I do not want to underestimate that. But this global pandemic is really new in our lifetime. We don't have a roadmap for how to deal with this. And we do know there's been a lot of fear and stress for families around it. And I will say that one of the challenges is that if children are experiencing stress, they're not learning. It is difficult for them to process new information when all they're feeling is stress or anxiety or worry. And so it's possible that even if they were getting content this spring through their classes, they may not have been absorbing the information in the same way. And that's okay because all children are experiencing various forms of stress right now. So I've heard many parents describe to me that, you know, I'm trying to get my child to do math and finish this worksheet, but everybody ends up in tears. And again, while many of us may be tabling remote learning this summer, I know there's this desire to try to make up for lost time in instruction. And a key thing I want to remind you here is that we were not homeschooling. If our schools we were attending in person sent us home to do remote learning, that is crisis schooling or learning at home during a crisis. It is very different than the homeschooling process. And there is no replacement for your child's teacher if that's how they started their school year. So I will tell you as a former teacher, teaching my own children is a far more challenging experience than preparing for a class of 25 seventh graders. And I would take that any day. It's much easier. However, I want to emphasize, even as a former teacher, that during quarantine, our children were still learning, whether it was the academics being sent from school or the online Zoom classes. But again, like, we have to remember that playing with Legos or building with blocks or, you know, drawing are all different forms of learning. And it requires a shift in our thinking about what learning means and looks like. So if I can give any advice about how best to prepare your child for school this fall, knowing that we know very little about what it will look like, I would tell you to let go of any academic cramming and let your children play this summer, because not only can you trust that they are learning, but we need to prepare them for the reality that if there's more remote learning this fall, we want to build up their confidence and their resilience and their courage and their sense of wonder this summer so that they can return to school feeling reinvigorated, not burned out. Okay, number 5, live your life out loud. So this living your life out loud means building executive function skills. So how do we help teach these things to our kids? And living your life out loud really just means narrating everything you do as you do it, which does feel a little weird at first, especially if you have really little kids or babies. But it's a great way to model how you are using your skills to live your life. So if it's, I'm looking at my phone to check out what time that we need to go pick up dad, or I'm looking at a recipe, you're showing them how they're using their phones. But it might even be things like, you know, I'm gonna go start dinner and there's, you know, the rice takes this long and I gotta pull this out of the fridge. And so you're showing them time management, how I structure this. This is not only free learning, you're building skills for your kids. So this summer, structured and unstructured time are both valuable and important, but there isn't a one size fits all. Some families might benefit from a structured schedule with, you know, 5 or 10 or whatever it is that works for you to kind of get through the day. And other families may thrive best without one. The important thing here is to find what has worked well for your family and stick with that. Don't try to do what everybody else is doing. And of course, because I'm the Screentime Consultant, I do really want to talk for a second about screen time. Yes, these are my own children looking at a screen. So as I've mentioned, I am not anti-technology. It's all about balance, in my opinion. And while our kids may be spending more time in front of a screen than we ever thought was possible or we even wanted them to be, it's also been really challenging because some children don't have the attention span to sit in front of a screen for more than 15 minutes. Maybe they're overwhelmed. That weird eye contact thing where I'm looking at a camera rather than the face is very difficult and overwhelming. And yet, if parents are trying to work from home, what's the alternative? And I very much empathize with that struggle. So what can I, the Screentime Consultant, tell you about setting screen time limits right now, knowing that even I am finding it challenging. And as we transition out of the school year and into summer, kids are going to feel like, wait, you're taking away my screens, because they feel like they've maybe had more because of the remote learning. So first of all, the first thing I can say is even a few limits are better than none. And you got to pick your battles. You got to pick the 1 or 2 or 3 things that are most important to you about that, and just being consistent. And so being consistent is far more important and effective than having a lot of different rules. So it might be something as simple as we don't have phones at the table for meals, or we don't have any tablets in the bedrooms, or we have screen-free Saturdays. You know, the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood is a great resource for information about that. And I have a lot of this on a handout that ParentMap will send to you after the webinar. The most important thing about these limits, however, is that you be as consistent as possible with them and relax the other ones. And the problem that parents run into all the time with screen limits is that they set too many and then they get overwhelmed and then nothing sticks, which is why I'm going to keep saying picking 1 or 2 or 3 things and just making that be the thing you work on will matter. If the overall screen usage feels higher than you want it, either because of remote learning or entertainment or you were trying to work, start using language like, right now we're using screens more than we usually do, or during quarantine, we relaxed some of the rules we had about screen time, or when quarantine is over, or during the summer, we're gonna go back to seeing people in a safe distance, or we're gonna have less time for screens. By using really clear language that sets this parameter and clear expectations about how we want it to look, how it will look, how it has looked, we're going to give our kids a better understanding of what it actually means. So it could even be things like, today we're going to limit screens to 1 hour, or today we don't have time for screens. There's so many other things we need to do. And again, I do understand for those parents who are trying to work from home, it's going to require a lot of creativity and flexibility, and I have a lot of empathy. I know this is hard. Another really key point that I like to make for families is that not all screen time is created equal. There are very different things between watching a YouTube video of another kid playing a video game versus participating in a small group online coding class. So being clear with yourself about what types of screen time you want is a valuable way to kind of decide which gets priority. Another great tool to help you understand that is the EdTech Triangle at everyschool.org. I think that's also on your handout. And then finally, the overarching key to managing screen time in general is being intentional. So remembering Dr. Doug Gentile's research earlier about childhood and how it's changed, it is super important that kids are doing other non-screen activities in their day, being outside, reading, spending time with family and friends if possible, getting messy. If all of those other things are happening and you're comfortable giving them screens and it's within your family's values, then do it. It's all about balance. Okay, I want to leave you with this quote because I kind of like this a lot. Creativity is intelligence having fun. So this isn't simple. This is not easy. We're definitely going to screw up. That's pretty much parenting in a nutshell, right? And we have to model real life for our kids. Making mistakes and addressing challenges is part of that. And also seeking connection with them, knowing that this has been a hard spring for many families. But it is also worth the effort to try and create a different kind of summer for our children, one that they will likely and hopefully remember in a positive way forever. So this is an opportunity to let our kids just be kids and to have fun this summer. So I will conclude. I do some small group stuff if you're interested, or individual parent coaching or webinars for schools. But I think Elaine.
Yep, I'm here.
Well, some questions. Thank you.
You can hear me. I'm not sure if I'm on screen or not, which it doesn't matter.
I'm gonna stop sharing.
There. Okay. First of all, Emily, thank you so much. You know, I'm going to start off with my own question selfishly. As a relatively new bubby grandmother, first of all, I loved your presentation, and incredibly practical, from the historic to tools of how you can use when you're on screen to navigate, to tell your kids what you're doing, from cooking to, figuring things out. I think that's great. Oh. My grandson is 18 months old. If this kid doesn't end up being an astronaut, because all he does when he sees us is act like there's a rocket ship, and then he wants to see a rocket take off on your phone. Yeah. So my real question is, what are some of your recommendations for the best way to kick off good habits? And I cannot get over how young this kid is, and I'm thinking about it.
No, it's awesome. It's never too early to start. I do a lot of small group stuff with PEPs too, and I love it because that early conversation, it's never too early to start thinking about this. So for kids, so here's what I like to say, because I always get this question about grandparents and grandchildren. Well, what about FaceTiming with grandma? It is the difference. Here's how I see it. When you're FaceTiming with grandma, you are using technology to maintain an existing relationship, which is different than using technology to try to build a relationship. So of course, I'm sure there's exceptions for people who live in foreign countries and are far away, but for you and what you're saying, you're using that as a tool to connect with your grandson. And it isn't about like you're sitting there for hours looking at those things. It's that you're just connecting in that moment. And again, just like any other tool, you're not going to do it all day long. You're not going to do it for hours on end. And I think that's a very valuable example. And I want to add one thing, which is that when my son was young, he wanted to watch train videos and Lego train videos. So we went to YouTube. We used Lego train videos on YouTube. And then he said, I want to see Lego train videos crashing. And I said, oh, okay. So we kind of looked at that. Well, the problem is, and this is such a great lesson for all families, is that YouTube has algorithms built in to recommend other related videos. Well, you go from Lego trains to Lego train crashes to real train crashes in a heartbeat. And it was astonishing. This was 10 years ago, but for me to realize I have to be really on top of that YouTube watching because it happens so quickly and often before we realize it. So doing it with you're doing that modeling and you're mentoring and you're talking about how let's use the phone to look at this short video and then let's go build a rocket, right? You can do more than one thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I mean, I can see, look, as a grandparent, you were with limited time. Yeah. As a parent, I could see how easy it would be when he is cranky, but like he loved to see it, how easy it would be to get sucked into more and more and more. So again, it's always our role modeling is so fundamental, and it can be hard work.
And it's easy in the short term to give the phone or the tablet. I get it. I mean, I've done it my own parenting. Like, it is easier in the short term. It does stop the tantrum. It does give you peace and quiet. And, again, replacing judgment with curiosity, there are moments we have to do that as parents, but that isn't the only option always. And so it becomes educating ourselves as parents about what are the alternatives. And I think the drawback of so much screen time is it's kind of helped take children away from knowing what it means to be a child and taken parents out of understanding what they can do to be better parents. So there's a lot more I could say on that.
Right. No, and I loved your, get messy and, being comfortable with chaos. I think it's so hard for especially young parents. And I will say, as a much older parent, actually getting comfortable with chaos is a gift you can really give yourself. So that's great. Okay. We have a bunch of questions in the queue. My son says he's doing fine and is on his Xbox and phone all day. He doesn't want to go out. How can I get him out of the house without forcing him? And this is, kind of an older, 15, 16-year-old.
Yeah. So the older the kids get, the harder it is. So one of the things I tell parents is that the longer you can delay giving a smartphone, the better for everybody, for you, for your kids. So that would be backing that up a bit for those parents with younger kids listening. Delay, delay, delay. On the other hand, it's never too late, I would like to believe, and I'm an optimist. So, really it's about making sure there are other things happening in that child's life beyond the screen. So again, you have to decide within your family's values how much screen time is enough or too much. And parents always ask me that, well, how much is too much? I say, well, a lot's okay, but a little is okay, but a lot's too much. So it's not specific for a reason. Because it looks different for every family and every kid responds differently to different amounts of screen time. So again, making sure that kids are doing things like being outside, being creative, being with friends, doing something physical, reading. Reading is one of those so simple things that has such a profound impact on learning and development. And literally, if you do nothing but let your kids read books, even comic books, and I get pushback on this, the research is out there. Reading is good no matter what it is they're reading, and rereading things is great. So anyway, as long as there's other things, that's kind of, it can require a lot more parent support, I think, especially as the kids get older, but that would be my short answer.
Yeah. There's an incredible number of questions that really circle around balance and creating screen time balance. Yep. And again, it is really family specific. And I think one of the things, I'm going to say this as an older parent, I don't usually infuse my own, but I have the gift of that behind me, because I had I have a 34-year-old daughter who was, of course, an early adopter to cell phone usage. Yeah. I will say one of my great failings was not understanding the power that I had as the person paying the bill. Yep. For the phone. And of course she was like, we didn't, there was no Emily Cherkin. There was no consulting on how to do this. So I will say for my own, being vulnerable, I did not understand how much power I had, and to put boundaries on it and set rules. Yeah. That would have been a gift to her and to myself.
Yeah, and I tell parents too, like, you don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of times the parents who come to me have come in several years into this process and are saying, I wish I had known. So, it's prevention model, right? Like, give education and upfront information, and especially reaching early childhood and young kids is a great way to start, but they often don't know. And being forgiving yourself too, because the reality is, I like to say, this is only a 5 to 10-year-old problem, really, because the iPad's barely not even 10 years old. And it wasn't designed for children initially. It's only really the last 5 years that kids have been accessing that. So it's completely shifted so dramatically in just a 10-year period that we don't have long-term data to say what the effects are yet. So, I hate to think that our kids are guinea pigs, but in many ways they are. And so the more we can be aware of it and on top of it as parents, and again, striking balance being the key here, because absolutism doesn't work in any form for anything.
Right. Well, this is kind of a carry on question from your, how you start with Legos and the train crash.
Yeah.
So this question is, do you have any effective strategies for keeping kids safe and ensuring appropriate behavior when they're online,
Yeah.
while also trying to give them some privacy?
Well, I'll answer the second part first, which is there's nothing private online. And if you're giving your kids access to the internet, you have to teach them that there is no privacy. So if they say they want to go in their room and close the door with their phone, I would recommend a strong conversation about that, because they should know that nothing is private. That doesn't mean you shouldn't respect your child's privacy, and that's a slightly different topic. But to keeping kids safe online, and this is such a tricky one, because really, I have a colleague whose parents will ask him, when should I get my kid a smartphone? And he'll say, when you're ready for them to see pornography, because the reality is they will. And it's not because they seek it out, it's because it's everywhere. How many of us have accidentally stumbled into something we didn't mean to? So if you're not ready to have that conversation, you really aren't ready for them to have access to the internet. And that being said, I also get asked all the time, like, what about parental controls? What should I use? Which ones should I pick? Mm-hmm. Well, here's my problem with parental controls. First of all, it's using tech to solve a problem tech created. It is often very cumbersome and a huge amount of work for parents, which, quite frankly, we're already busy and overwhelmed. We don't want to add that to our list. And it takes the parent out of the equation. Using parental controls does not exempt us as parents from mentoring our children and teaching them about how to be safe online. And yeah, it's great if you want to use it in conjunction, mentoring and monitoring is the quote is Devorah Heitner's quote is, be the mentor, not the monitor. And that's okay if you want to do both, but you don't get to just buy the product, download it on the kids' phones and call it good. You still have to teach them. So that's my 2 cents.
So, this especially for the age group that I think is a little bit of the sweet spot of where you can have impact. I'm curious what kind of what is the kind of rules of the day, as far as, I know that I was very late in allowing my now youngest 18-year-old to get a phone, but it's sort of the herd mentality. Like, I would say to my daughter, excuse me, I drop you off at school, I pick you up at school, you can go to the office and call me. Why do grade school? And then it becomes like, well, Jane has one and Susie has one. No kid really needs a phone during daytime, at least through, I would say, I don't know, maybe you'll fill in the blank for that, but I'd love some of that, because it's, it's like the rules on kids are coming over to play, no phones. So maybe talk a little bit about the collective action that parents can think about.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I get this a lot too. I mean, definitely talking to other parents is a great way to band together to sort of set some similar ground rules around how phones are going to look. But to my earlier point about delay, the longer you can wait, the easier your life will be. And I often hear parents say, well, I give them a smartphone because it's convenient, because I need to be able to reach them. And Elaine, you're absolutely right. That's what I say, is the offices at schools still have phones, they function, and many schools have a no phones policy anyway. So, and I can't tell you how many times teachers tell me that parents are constantly texting their kids during the school day anyway. So again, we're talking about executive function skills, and what about autonomy and independence? We've got to stop texting our kids during the school day, which again, doesn't apply right now. But if you can give your kids opportunities to build some skills by not relying on the phone. See, this is where I go, this to me is a win-win, because every generation has said, well, Elaine got this and I didn't. And it's always that FOMO, fear of missing out, is so real, especially for middle school. I taught middle school for 12 years. It's all about, oh my gosh, am I included or am I not? Or do I have this it thing or do I not? And it takes a brave parent to say, sorry, just because you feel like everyone else has it doesn't mean I'm going to give it to you. And I can give you the data. I actually didn't put this slide in because I was trying to not over talk. But it is true that 70% of 12-year-olds have smartphones now. But I always point out that means 30% don't. So it's not everybody. And I have the data to show it. And so I have a 12-year-old son. He doesn't have a smartphone, and we compromised with a flip phone. And our rule is it doesn't leave the house. It's fine. He stays in touch with his friends. They text him, and yes, he has to do predictive texting and he complains about it. great, you got to do that work. You know, you're learning something here. And I don't mean to be flip, because I know that for kids, a lot of it is a social connection, but that's where, you know, parents, we can still show up and help them with that. And it does mean being flexible and trying to sort of figure out the ways like, well, how can I help my 12-year-old be independent when all of his friends are communicating, you know, over this app or this social media thing. And, you know, for him, for right now, it hasn't been a huge issue, and the flip phone is working for us. In a few years, ask me about my daughter. I don't know what's going to happen, but that's where we are. And I really do think parents don't need to give into that pressure. It's not a rite of passage. It doesn't need to be the thing everybody gets on their 12th birthday. And if you do it, you have to bring in all of these. It's like driving a car is the metaphor I like to give. You know, your kid turns 16, you don't just give them car keys and say, have fun. They have to do driver's ed and have a permit and do all these hours. The same thing has to be true for the phone. In many ways, the phone is as dangerous as a car.
I think that's phenomenal advice. And the one thing we know as parents is it's a lot harder to up the ante of boundaries than to start out with the driving contract or the phone contract that, you know, starts out with extremely limited use that feels comfortable, because you can always expand on it, but it's very hard to retract. It's a good lead into probably our last question. My 10-year-old son and 13-year-old daughter are asked to participate in about 4 to 5 Zoom meetings for school per week. Now they are Zoom fatigued, but love connecting with their friends. When I suggest using the telephone to talk with their friends, they scoff at the idea. Any suggestions? Like, if you can answer this one, Emily, any suggestions on how to support their desire to connect with friends? I'm Zooming at this point.
I get it. The Zoom fatigue is real. I mean, all of us are just exhausted. And there was a great article about how your brain does process things differently when you're viewing and engaging with people, even live on a screen. And I understand that. And it always cracks me up when kids are like, oh, I forgot my phone. I gotta go get my phone. No kid uses it as an actual phone. I mean, I don't know the last time I saw a 12-year-old make a phone call, right? Like this, they're using it for chatting and texting, and that's their medium right now. But that's an old school skill. If we're talking about old school summer, I mean, bring out an old rotary phone. You can get them at thrift stores for really cheap, and it's hilarious, right? Like, you don't know what to do with it. The dials and the buttons so, you know, I'm being facetious to some degree, but, you know, if children are Zoom fatigued, we have to respect that. The good news is, or the bad news is, school's almost over and we're about to enter into a vast open hours with lots of time. You know, bring back letter writing and postcards. The post office still works, and it's a different way of communicating. And talk about delayed gratification, right? You don't get immediate responses to things, but it's going to require, this summer is going to require us to really do things differently, and different isn't bad.
Well, and again, I think that, you know, parents are under so much stress and strain right now, understandably. And, you know, when you're trying to work and you have little kids around you, you know, it is really, really impossible, but it might be a wonderful time to really reset for families. And I mean, I should know the answer to this, Emily, because I'm sitting here thinking of my own family, and I'm like, do you do private consulting with families? Because what I was thinking about is, you know, with so many of our speakers, like Laura Kastner and others, their adults and their teens and tweens come along because it's so much easier for the message to come from the speaker, the professional expert, than it is to come from mom or dad. So, you know, that's good to know.
Yeah, and I take a very empathetic approach because I'm a parent too. So as much as I'm a teacher, I'm a parent first, and I get that this is hard. And I will say the parents who find the most success in working with me more deeply are the ones who are open to change and wanting things to be different. I can't fix your kid. This is a parenting challenge. And so, you know, your kids need you to be ready to help them. And so that's how I can be supportive. Yeah.
That is great. Those are I just keep going back to, I know that we at any age or stage can be better role models about being present and putting our own phones down and, not buying into that urgency. So I just want to sort of close by, first of all, thanking you. I mean, really helpful and informative, and for everyone who joined. And also, again, to our sponsors. And I want to encourage everyone to look at ParentMap.com, because we have creative movement classes with Pacific Northwest Ballet. On June 11th, we have race, equity, and Holocaust education in partnership with the Holocaust Center on June 16th. And we have a number of anti-racism events coming up that we just don't have the final details on yet, but we will have those in the next few days. And most importantly, we really love your feedback. So let us know if you have thoughts about other events that we should have, Zoom events. And again, we get some of our best insight and information from our readers. So thank you all for joining in, and have a great evening.
Thank you for having me, Elaine.
Bye.
Bye-bye.